part two of Faith Film and the American Dream. This morning, well, first of all, we've got a magazine cover on the screen from 1959, Saturday Evening Post. It's just an image, and yet it tells a story. One picture, right, tells a story. The young couple sitting under the tree, dreaming of the future. And boy, does the future look nice. A great big house, swimming pool, TV, appliances, a car, so forth. The American Dream right there. And this morning, we're going to focus on story and plot. Next week we're going to do something a little bit different. But I want to say this about stories. Stories are powerful things. The writer Chimamanda Adichie says in a wonderful, wonderful TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story, she says, we are vulnerable before stories. Stories do all kinds of things, and we are taken in by story. And of course, stories are biblical also. The Bible itself is a big story full of lots of smaller stories, among other things, in there. This story, by the way, I want to mention one thing about the American Dream. Houses. Generally, a lot of times when the American Dream comes up, very, very often, a house is a big part of the whole thing. And houses will be a theme very, very often in these stories. And so speaking of stories, we're going to focus on It's a Wonderful Life this morning and do a number of other things. But because not everybody maybe has seen the film, or people at home watching on YouTube may not have seen the film, I feel like I need to very quickly run through the plot of It's a Wonderful Life, which is actually a complicated plot. But for those who have not seen it, it starts with people praying for a man named George Bailey who is in trouble. This man lives in a little town called Bedford Falls, and a novice angel from heaven is shown scenes from George Bailey's life. And we go along sort of with the angel in some way on the movie, learning about George Bailey. As a young man, he wants to see the world, he wants to travel, then he wants to go to college, become an engineer, and build bridges and airfields and buildings and skyscrapers. But each time he's on the verge of heading off on that dream, something happens, and he feels compelled, almost against his will, to stay back in Bedford Falls. And this happens a number of times. Just as he's ready to head off to college, his father dies, and his father runs a little building and loan, and George Bailey had been working there, and George realizes that the board wants him to head up the building and loan. He doesn't want to do it, but if he doesn't do it, Potter, who is sort of the nemesis in this film, a corrupt, greedy businessman, will take over the building and loan, and then a lot of people who are getting their houses through the building and loan will be in bad shape. So he stays behind. He marries his childhood sweetheart, Mary, and just as they're heading off on their honeymoon, there's a crisis. It's the Depression. There's a bank run, and people are running a bank run onto the building and loan, and George has to stop and runs back, and Mary and he volunteer their own money to help appease the investors, give them the money they need, and he saves the building and loan. Even during World War II, when everybody goes off and fights, George Bailey has to stay at home because he's deaf in one ear. So every time he tries, every time he tries to head off on these dreams, he's thwarted, or he feels like he has to do something to help out other people. And then the story takes us to the day that all the people are praying, and just as we're getting to the end of this sort of recap of his life with the angel, and it's Christmas Eve, presumably Christmas Eve 1945, right after World War II ends. There's going to be a big town celebration for his brother, who's a war hero, and on that day, his kindly, bumbling, sort of alcoholic uncle is making a deposit in the bank of $8,000 to pay off a debt from the building and loan, and accidentally loses it, and Potter gets a hold of it and keeps it and steals it, and his uncle and George don't know where this money is. They're going around, and it's a great crisis in George's life because everything will just fall apart without that money. They have a bank examiner coming in. We could get arrested and go to jail, and he is despondent, and he realizes that if he dies, his life insurance will cover the loan, and so he's thinking about committing suicide. This is where the angel, so that's when, this is after 3/4 of the way through the movie, then we get to this point where now the angel kind of appears to George and tries to convince him, you shouldn't kill yourself. He has a hard time, and he realizes, okay, the way to do this is show him what would life be like in Bedford Falls if George never existed. And he goes into this strange existential period where he goes off and takes them around town. At that very moment, Bedford Falls isn't even Bedford Falls, it's Pottersville, and his mother is living as a head of a boarding house and is very unhappy, and people are angry and mad, and downtown is got casinos and like strip clubs and pawn shops. It's kind of like Las Vegas with snow, and it's just a real mess. The whole town is, and his wife is an old maid working as a librarian. Sorry, librarians. Anyway, all of that is greatly disturbing to George Bailey, and he realizes that he really does want to live. And it's like all of this has happened because he's had an impact on the town that is that big. And he also is distressed by the idea that he never would, that, he doesn't exist. I think that's kind of interesting, the deep, deep distress that he does not really exist in this strange alternative world. And he says he wants to live. And at that moment, he's transported back to real life. And he's just so full of joy and happiness. He's going to go to jail. He doesn't care. He runs and he's, comes back home. And at that point, the word has gotten out about the problem with the money. And all his friends come forward with money, and they pile it in. It's enough to cover the $8,000, and we end with a happy ending. Okay, so that's the film. For those of you who saw it this week or have known it before, I want to start off with just this question. On anything, what works or doesn't work for you in this film? Just something that works or doesn't work. Can be anything. Let me just hear a few where people are coming from. Done. You don't like how it ends. Why? Frank Capra, the director, said of all the movies he made some other big movies, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he got more angry letters on this one because Potter gets away with it. Potter keeps the money. He is not punished. Nothing bad happens to him. People are so mad about that. You would have liked to have seen Potter get justice. In the American, see, now this is interesting. This will be a later topic. Does the American dream only work if things are fair and just? See, that's a later topic, but that's a very good point. Somebody else, what worked or didn't work for them?
I didn't really like how he really lost his temper with his family.
Oh, he has a dark side, doesn't he? George Bailey, there are times when his anger, there's a couple of moments when you're thinking, this may turn abusive. Now, there's two, this is a question I ask of my students. You didn't like, within the world of the film, you just don't like characters when they turn that way, or is it that you don't like the film? Would the film have been better if George Bailey never lost his temper? Or you understand why he lost the temper and that makes a good film, it's just that you don't like it when characters are that way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, it showed more of the depth of that character.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the film would have been better or worse. I mean, he really was going off the deep end. So I
Yeah.
think he had to do something.
Yeah.
The film had to show that.
Yeah, so in some ways it makes it a more effective film, but sometimes effective films, there are things about them that are disturbing or unsettling to us.
Which my English teacher in high school said, all the feel-good films were just,
Oh yeah, if it's too much of a feel-good film, then there's, right? All stories often about all stories have a conflict built into them. And that means that's part of what makes something compelling about the story.
I think you could
Barb.
identify with him, that he's a real person.
Oh, he become okay. Yeah, as we sometimes say, he seems more human because he has this dark side of him. Because, quite frankly, he is so very good in other ways, right? Almost a little too good, maybe. Sometimes I feel, but to me, it makes him more human that he's got this angry temper at times. Other things that, Dan?
It's like just war.
Just war.
Is there justification for war? Is there
Oh.
justification for
And is there justification for anger?
anger? What was his anger directed at?
And how does he use his anger? Because sometimes he uses his anger in proper ways, right? To fight back against Potter abusing people in the town. Yeah, good.
Well,
Other,
they say you get angry and explosive towards people that you know love you. Because they're going to love you, hopefully.
yeah, yeah.
And if you explode to other people, they're gone. They're not going to put up with you.
Yeah, yeah. There's maybe some sort of social norms there that keep us in check in public that oftentimes with our loved ones we don't have. Done.
If they give you a self-appraisal to stop it, like, what if you did exist?
Ah, yes. This is good. This is good. And films do this and maybe should, well, films almost always lead us into identifying with the main character, the protagonist. And a good film, or maybe a good reading of a film, as we identify with that main character, should let us say, well, what if I were that person, or in that situation, or when have I behaved similarly, and then what happens is we can better empathize with the main character and maybe other people in the film as well, which I think is a important Christian quality, to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of other people, even other people who are really pretty different from us, and understand where they're coming from, even when it's not pretty, or to put it in stark theological terms, even when it's sinful. We can understand why that reaction comes out in that way. All right, and we could go more and more with that if you were my class, which, a given class I had 2.5 hours. I had more time. I would go around and have every one of you say what works and what doesn't work. And you'd be nervous at first, but after a while you get used to it. And you knew coming in, that's what we'd talk about, so you'd be fine with it. And some of you are fine with it. Good, that's helpful. So let me ask about the film overall. To what extent do you think it fit with the American dream? Or did not fit? To what extent would you say?
Not everybody achieves their American dream, and he achieved his in a way that he had not planned. If he calls it his American dream at the end, I don't know.
Yes. That's a good question, because part of the issue here is that he has these dreams and he never achieves those particular dreams. And so, and becoming an engineer, he doesn't, at the end of the movie, he's not materially rich, right? And not as wealthy as what he expects to be in terms of money. So in that way, that's not an American dream. But does the American dream mean achieving something else? That's an interesting question. That's one we'll probably come back to at different times.
He may not get his dream that he originally planned for himself, but in a way he has the American dream. He has the family. He has the steady job. He has the friends. He has the, all those things.
Yeah, so there's a sense in the American dream that you end up with happiness of some sort. That's kind of the message of the American dream. And he's certainly happy. It's a wonderful life. He's certainly happy at the end. He has family. He has friends. He has a house. Now, whether that's the American dream or not, again, is part of this question. So he does have that. Sue?
Maybe the American dream is that you can.
Maybe the American dream is, I'm sorry, what?
That you can
That you can,
dream.
that you can dream. That you have the opportunity to?
Other places you know what you're getting.
Yes, yes. That certainly is, I think, and we're going to break this down a little bit as we go along, that is certainly a necessary component of the American dream, because part of it, and that's as people use that term, that's the sense of America in the American dream, that America is a place where you have the chance, you have the opportunity to do something. And frankly, George Bailey could have, at any number of times, just said, forget it, left Bedford Falls, and gone off to college and taken his tour. So he had the opportunity to do the more traditional path if he wanted to. So that part about opportunity is, I would say, a necessary component of the American dream as we understand it. Okay, let me switch. We could go on with this, but let me switch the question a little bit. To what extent does this or does this not fit with the kingdom of God?
Well, he had free choice.
Okay, he has free choice. And so there is, and oftentimes there are moral questions bound up with that he has to decide, right? What is the right thing to do? What is the best thing to do? And they're not easy. And that part of the biblical story, that's life, right? And God gives us this choice, this will, to go one way or the other with things in life. Good. Other ways, Sue.
Living in the present and living toward something rather than looking backwards and not living in the possibility of whatever God's doing. Isn't that where God is?
Yes,
In the present.
that the kingdom of God, like the kingdom of the mustard seed, there's growth, there's change over time. You're going somewhere.
The kingdom of God is in the present.
Oh, the kingdom of God is in the present, even as you're facing forward. And so where do you see that in the film?
All of it.
Okay. Because it is the story of him and his situation. Deep questions, existential questions even in this film about that. Done.
Well, I've heard Ben and Michael and Dave also, that the kingdom is now. And I wonder when we talked about the American dream, probably most of us in here have the American dream, we don't realize it.
Yeah.
Maybe the same thing's true about the kingdom of God, we don't really realize it.
Oh, yes. This is, okay, I like this. So Don says, most of us probably have achieved the kingdom, or the American dream in some sense, some sort of level of prosperity. And we maybe don't realize it or don't think about it. Interestingly enough, by the way, America still is the most, by many measures, there are a couple other countries that are up there, the most prosperous country in all of history. The odd thing is that a lot of Americans don't feel that way. That's another interesting sort of dynamic. We feel like we're prosperous. We feel like we're being pinched. But maybe it's there and we don't have it. And then the kingdom of God may be similar. We have the kingdom of God. within us as believers? Do we know that and understand it? That's a very good question. And my thought is maybe studying film would be a way to bring these things out. That's a segue. So I'm going to let me build on this and move forward a little bit to talk about, and today the way I'm going to talk about that is a feature of film, which is story. And let me do a little mental exercise, okay? I am thinking of a film, and I'm wondering if you can guess what this film is based on the basics of the plot. And here's the plot. There's a good guy, and he's in a society where suddenly bad guys are on the rise, and they are threatening, they're gaining power, and they're threatening people and freedom and security and everything else. And they get into a battle with one another, and there are twists and turns in the battle, and it gets to the point like the good guy and his buddies might lose, and the bad guys are going to win, and then suddenly they overcome it, and at the end, the good guys win. Oh, are there a lot of movies like that? A lot of westerns. A lot of superhero movies. We can name a lot. Okay, so quite frankly, that there are a lot of movies like that. Okay, so let me give you a different plot. There's a guy and there's a girl, and they meet in sort of unexpected circumstances, and maybe there's some sort of attraction there, but the circumstances in some strange way kind of push them apart or pushes one of them apart, and weird things happen, and you don't know whether they're going to get together or they are going to get together, and it looks like it's all going to fall apart, but in the end something happens, and they do see that they love one another, and they are together and are happy. Every Hallmark movie ever made, romance movies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't it interesting that we have all these movies that have this same basic plot? And they are all subsets of what can be called the classic Hollywood plot. Now, this is not the only kind of plot you can have, but this is a very, very popular one. And here are the elements of the classic Hollywood plot. And I'll just say we call it the Hollywood plot because when moving pictures were invented, Thomas Edison and so forth, and coming on the scene about 1900, there were movies being produced in Britain and in Germany and France and Italy and so forth. And World War I came along, and for European countries, like that just put a halt to their whole movie industry. But the United States stayed out of it, and Hollywood was the center, or became the center. And so Hollywood ended up dominating, and plus American economics started dominating film. And the plot of a lot of these films, which continues today, comes out of that early dominance of Hollywood and American culture. And yeah, just saying that for the basic of all these films that we see. So you have a main character who has a goal, or maybe two main characters if it's a romantic comedy, right? They want to find true love. Or Luke Skywalker needs to defeat Darth Vader and the Death Star. The goal's in conflict with other characters. Darth Vader. Or in a rom-com, somebody, maybe a third person, or maybe they're just sort of in conflict with one another. They don't know that they love each other, but they should. And the plot is completely driven by the characters. What they do, what they say, how they act is what drives the plot forward, which means that it's not driven so much by larger forces beyond them. As Christians, we might say, like, God. Is God involved in any of this? And in most classic Hollywood plots, God doesn't even come up. Or larger social forces that are beyond your control, economic and that sort of thing. And then the conflict is resolved in the end, and usually it's a happy ending. This is so common, we probably don't even think about it, and we're saying, well, yeah, isn't that like stories? That's movies. But there are a lot of movies that don't follow this plot line. It's just that this is the most common structure of films and structure of stories that we find in film. It's so popular that, like I said, you couldn't even, you're like, and the immediate thought is, and this is true, well, that could be all kinds of movies, westerns and sci-fi movies and so forth. And when on the very first day when our students walk in, I have them write down, just pick a favorite movie and explain what it is and why you like it. And then we go on and we talk. And then I get to this point a little later on, about an hour later, and I say, okay, go back and look at it. Does it follow the classic Hollywood plot? And generally about 90% of the films that they choose do. It's just very, very common. So common, by the way, that Americans will take other stories and change them to fit the classic Hollywood plot. So for instance, The Little Mermaid, put out by Disney, is based on a story by the original story was written by Hans Christian Andersen in Denmark. But in the original story, as you get towards the end, if you know this story, Little Mermaid falls in love with a prince she sees on a boat, and she wants to be able to walk and be human, and she makes a deal with kind of like a witch, and the witch says, okay, I'll give you legs, but I'm going to take your voice, and she can't speak, but you have a little relationship, but in the end, now and the thought is, but if you find true love with the prince, you'll get the voice back. In the Hans Christian Andersen story, the prince marries the witch. Not only that, but the way the curse worked is, if that happened, on the next morning after the wedding, one of them has to die, either the prince or the Little Mermaid. And in the Hans Christian Andersen story, the Little Mermaid climbs aboard the ship, comes to the little tent where the prince is lying with his bride asleep just before the sun comes up. She looks at him, she bent down and kissed his fair brow, then looked in the sky in which the rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. Then she glanced at the sharp knife, because she's in there to kill him so she will live. And again fixed her eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in his dreams. She, the bride, was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hands of the Little Mermaid. She flung it far away from her into the waves. And then she jumped off the ship, and she died. How come Disney didn't tell that story? Right? What happens in the Disney story? Oh, well, the witch is killed. The prince kills he drives that ship into Ursula. She's huge, right? And the witch is killed. And then the Little Mermaid gets her legs, and they go and they see each other. They get married, and they live happily ever after. Why did Disney tell the story? Here's a question: why did Disney tell the story that way? What? Exactly. How many tickets would they have sold? Would Americans have liked that story? No. Apparently the Danes do. Just saying. Other cultures have oftentimes different stories that they think are good stories. We like a good story, oftentimes Americans, with a happy ending. And this would not have sold. So you got to change the ending to have this happy ending and have them get together again. Not that you've given up your life because for whatever reason, Little Mermaid wanted him to be happy or something like that. So why do Americans like this? And I think there are a number of reasons, but let me suggest two things that are work here, and I think there are other things that work here. First of all, we like what is familiar. And humans are just that way. We like familiar things. Studies show there's actually we have an unconscious bias. We don't even realize it towards what's familiar. What's familiar, we feel comfortable with it. And we are familiar with the classic Hollywood plot. And so, right, you think about getting into a movie where there's the bad guys versus the good guys, and you're kind of worried, but you know what? You're like, the good guy's not going to get killed. You know it. The good guy's not going to die at the end. Romance, you know, he and she falls in love together. You know they're going to get together somehow at the end. The fun is just, how's it going to happen? And so we have, even without thinking about it, we have this sort of familiar sense that we know this is going to turn out all right. Although not all movies do that. And we kind of pick up clues when we get into a movie, whether it might be that way or not. But also, I want to suggest the other reason Americans like it, because it actually fits with our conception of the American dream. Because the American dream has a happy ending as a story. And a happy ending involves me. And so I can hope that I also will end up with the nice house and the economic prosperity and comfort and so forth. If I just work at it in some way. I would argue, in fact, that the classic Hollywood plot is built on the American dream. Because the American dream as a concept actually goes back to about the birth of our nation. You can find it in Ben Franklin's autobiography, where he describes how he ran away from home and didn't have the freedom, and he got to Philadelphia, he had the freedom, and he worked hard. A lot of what his autobiography is about is how he becomes a success. And he starts out really, really poor, and then he becomes successful, and the implication is that he's making a lot of money because he has freedom to do that. That's a familiar story to us, and it fits with the American dream. Now, let me also suggest there are other kinds of stories. So, a very different story. Mark 4:26. It's a parable. But parables are stories. Okay, here's the story. And he said, the kingdom of God is as if a man should scatter seed on the ground. He sleeps and rises night and day, and the seed sprouts and grows. He knows not how. The earth produces by itself first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. But when the grain is ripe, at once he puts it in the sickle because the harvest has come. End of story. Okay. How does this not fit the classic Hollywood plot? What's different about it? The man is not in charge. No. Yeah, I mean, he's doing things, he's growing things, but it grows, he knows not how. That's right. Who is in charge? Jesus is in charge. God is in charge. This is about God and how God moves in the world, right? In just ordinary daily life, like growing things. Good. How else is this not the classic Hollywood plot?
Nothing bad happens.
Nothing bad happens. You're right. Here's one, presumably without a conflict. Here's a story without a key conflict. You don't have bad guys. You don't have good guys in it. Now, there are bad guys in the Bible, but not in this story. This is not a story about that way. It's about a guy going out and growing food.
Well, it doesn't tell how the man benefited from that.
No, right. There's nothing about him coming out at the end. Now, it might be sort of implied that you have food, but it's not a story about, look, you've gotten richer. Pardon? I'm sorry, Don, say that again? You don't know anything about him as a person. We don't have this, like, we know all about George Bailey. We identify with him. In this one, we don't know anything about him. He is not the main character, in fact. God is the main character. We do know something about God, though. God does things, we don't know how they work. And some of those things are just ordinary things that supply us with food. And we have a role in that. You go out and I think that's part of what happened, and then there's a harvest. Or maybe it's about not just growing food, but it's about the growth of the kingdom of God. Maybe this is a metaphor for other things. Katie?
I was going to take it another direction. Maybe we are the seeds.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like
Right. 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 Maybe we are the seeds, right? Especially if you put it with other parables, like, the sower went out to sow his seeds, or especially that image, the harvest has come, is sort of like people are coming into the truth of God or whatever. Okay, my main point is there are different kinds of stories. Could you make a movie out of that? You could somehow. Would it sell a lot of tickets? Probably not. And yet, it's an important story. So here's a different kind of story, and we're just not used to these kinds of stories. But so let me suggest this, that there is, of course, a biblical story. This is part of the biblical story, but there's the gospel, the news. And theologians have phrased it in a lot of different ways. Since we're Presbyterian, I'll go to the good Reformed part way of describing the story. There's God's creation. It's wonderful. It's good. There's the fall. There's sin. Then there's creation, fall, redemption. Christ dies on the cross to bring things back and reconcile us to God. And then there's finally glorification, where it all comes together in the end. And there is a happy ending to the Christian story, right? But then there's all these other little stories in between there. And let me suggest this, that I think it's great to read a lot of different kinds of stories. I think we also need the Christian story, and we need to be reminded of all the different kinds of stories in the Christian story, because how often do we hear the American dream story? Man, does that have a lot of power, because so many movies we watch and books we read are the classic Hollywood plot. It's on the cover of magazines. Last week we saw a commercial with Ndamukong Suh that's based on the American dream. And I'm not saying those stories are evil, but what I am saying is if that's the only story you pay attention to, and it can happen, as Don says, without us even recognizing it, then you're going to be missing out on. Chimamanda Adichie says we need a range of stories. There's a danger in one single story. We need a lot of different kinds of stories. And so I would say two things from this. It's good to watch a lot of different kinds of movies, but it's also very, very important to come back to church every Sunday, or every Sunday you can, and be reminded of the biblical story, the gospel story, to keep us in line so we don't fall. There's a theory in communication called the cultivation theory of communication, and that is people who immerse themselves into one kind of media, tend to think that is how the world operates, and that's how it should operate, and that can be off base in some ways. So I'm saying a range of stories is a good thing.
When you talk about the American dream,
Yeah.
do you think a lot of people think that Christianity, does he like the American dream?
Oh, this is a good question. Should Christianity be like the, and so here's the thing about stories, right? They kind of meld and fit together in some ways, and do people put those together as the same thing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think there are people who do, yeah. Now this is complicated. Okay, so let's move on in this way. First of all, let me talk a little bit about the American dream as a story. I've mentioned this goes back at least to Benjamin Franklin, but all through the 19th century there was this: you come to America, you work hard, you will succeed. We have freedom, we have opportunity. The term American dream was coined by a historian in 1931, who was looking back on American history, and that actual phrase he came up with, James Truslow Adams, said there's been also the American dream, the dream of a land. Here's the American part, right? This is a place where life should be better and richer and fuller for every man, with opportunity. There's the opportunity that we had for each according to his ability and achievement. Now, I think there are a lot of good and true things in here, in this American dream. But at the same time, this should not be our only story, right? And this can go, you know, a couple of different ways. Well, yeah. So this is what we're talking about. We're going to continue over the next few weeks talking about this in different sort of ways. So here's a question. Is the point of It's a Wonderful Life, is the American dream the point of It's a Wonderful Life, would you say? Is that the main message of that film?
Maybe more like overcoming obstacles, because he was cut off at every opportunity that he had, and it's beyond, it maybe wasn't beyond his control, but he chose the ethical, moral,
So you'd say variation, the main story is about overcoming obstacles and what happens, because life sometimes, notice, there are forces beyond George's control, right? That come upon him. His dad dies at a critical moment. There is depression, there are bank runs, there is, you know, Potter doing his Potter things. So he's overcoming obstacles. Why did they have the angel on? Yeah, now this is an interesting sort of part of the narrative pattern here, that you put an angel in here, and that's a great question. And so I don't have a definitive answer to that, but we can have a lot of good answers to that. Why do you think the story makers, and this is based on a book, but then you also have a director who does things with the story, so why do you think they put an angel in here? No.
so the angel could do that,
Yes.
but also a little devil could do that too.
Well, that's true too. Could be a devil that does that, takes you back in time. Yeah.
Could do it, they could go through that new his life, he saved his brother, you know, and if you go through everything that happened, and they could do it the way the angel did, they might not jump into the river like the angel did, but.
Yeah, Clarence had his own way of helping George, jumping into the river. But you say, by going back and showing these parts of the life, then what's your main conclusion out of that?
Then he would see that, well, if I hadn't saved my brother,
Oh,
he wouldn't have been Army war hero. If I hadn't
yeah,
stayed here at the bank and Uncle, whatever his name was, ran it,
yeah,
he wouldn't have survived. And
yeah. Yeah, see, this is a very good point, and this is a cinematic technique of this film that I think is fairly effective, because George, you know, somebody could go up to George when he's on that bridge and say, no, you've done so much good for everybody. You really are. Look, these good things have happened to you in your life. Make him joyful. Yes, I want to live. Chances are not. But by taking him into this weird existential world where he does not exist, he can see real differences. And we also, right? We also see. And you know, on the one hand, I don't know if anybody makes that big of a difference on an entire town. And yet, there's a certain logic to it. Like you said, he saved his brother's life. And they make the point, because you saved your brother's life, all those men on the transport in the war were on the transport plane that were, and were saved because of that. And other things. And the implication is, because you kept the building and loan going, Potter was not able to take over the town. And so by actually seeing that, it settles in even more deeply to him. And doesn't it do that with us too? The power of a story, right? This is an interesting technique and a kind of an odd one of taking you back with George and thinking, might things actually be different if I did not exist? And might they be even worse? So I think that's part of the reason they use the angel in that technique. Other thoughts on the angel?
Maybe it takes a severe crisis, existential crisis, to make us realize there is an angel in everything we decide to do. Don't recognize.
Yes, maybe you need an existential crisis to turn your thoughts to more transcendent, higher sort of things.
Because the angel is with you all the time.
Oh.
You don't see it.
Oh, yeah. So then are there some sort of Christian parallels here, or maybe even some reminders, maybe a better way of thinking about it, of what we believe to be really true? Angel, but the Holy Spirit is with us all the time, and we may not recognize that. It's also interesting that, and so in the time of crisis, suddenly George prays. He says he's not a praying man, but he makes a prayer. And that's another interesting thing. He makes a prayer, and then suddenly things happen from heaven to help him out, which we know and believe as people of faith. Well, yeah, that's prayer. Hopefully you do it regularly, but especially in times of crisis, right? There are no atheists in foxholes, they say. Suddenly, when you're thinking about the biggest existential question, then you're or as Eugene Peterson says, the most, what did he, I can't remember now the adjective he said. The most common form of prayer, the most basic prayer goes like this: help. And so that's an interesting point about that there too.
Forgive me because I didn't watch the movie this past week. I have watched it before, but
That's all right.
I'm wondering if the choices he made and the choices they showed were maybe the kingdom at work. Where he made kingdom choices versus the American dream choices.
Yeah, so you would see his choices more as kingdom choices than American dream choices. That's an interesting sort of point. Yeah. What do the rest of you think? Where and how? Is he making, whether he realizes it or not, or whether the viewer realizes it or not, is he making kingdom choices? They're self-sacrificial. Where and how does he sacrifice his own desires? He sends his brother to college. He stays home. It was his brother's turn to take over the building and loan when his dad dies. But instead, he takes over the building and loan and sends his brother off to college, sacrificing himself for whom? His brother, who gets to go to college, and the community, because he realizes that if Potter is in control of that company, his greed is going to, have a bad effect. You have the bank run. By the way, Mary's also a little hero in this story. She's not the main character, but she's really something too. And in that bank run, it's a moment that it's a great moment for me. When they're all panicking, and he's saying, we got to stick together. What do you do? I need this money. And George is like, ah. And then Mary's in the background and says, here's the money. Right? It's Mary. And he immediately jumps on it. Yes, that's right. He hops over the desk. He can count out the 2,000. They give up their honey, both of them. Mary is also self-sacrificial in this movie. They both give up their honeymoon for the benefit of these other people economically. Potter offers George a job. Now, did you catch the finances of that? I had to do a quick calculation in my head, and I'd done it before, but I'd forgotten. He was making $40 a week, which comes out to a little over $2,000 a year. How much does Potter offer him to come work for him? $20,000. 10 times his salary. And of course, initially he's taken in. Well, sure, why not? And he shakes his hand. Right, and thinks, wait a minute. Now that, okay, how many Americans are going to turn down a raise in 10 times your salary in that situation? I mean, that's in some ways, I think that's fairly remarkable. I mean, we're cheering along from him. Yes, don't do it, George. Don't go with Potter. Yes, you did the right thing. Yes, you did the right thing. But you realize how, you know, in the context, how much he is sacrificing there. So those would be examples, I think, because in each one of those things, you're turning down money and opportunity for something else. So you can leave with the sense of, is this about the American dream or not about the American dream? Is it that the real point of the movie is that George is continually denying himself for the benefit of other people, and that's good? Or is it slightly different? If you look at the very end, he gets that book from the Clarence. You know, he opens it up and there's the inscription, and the inscription says, remember, no man is a failure who has friends. Is it really that the most important thing is that you have friends? Because then they'll come and help you when in your time of crisis.
Yes.
Yes? Is it all of those things? Can it be? People will take different conclusions away from this movie, but also many other movies. I think actually the really interesting films are those that lead you into further sort of questioning and discussion about, well, what about this? What about that? Okay. How many of you would say this film, no, let me just throw this out as a general question. Does this film celebrate the American dream, or does it critique it? Or is it option C, something else? Why would you? I'm just going based on other historians, because that's what historians do. We talk about each other. But also because this is a powerful story in our culture, is it not? And so we need to think about these stories and say, let me say this, let me suggest this. There is a part of this film that has a very, what do I want to say? There's a part of this film that has a positive take on the American dream in some ways. Let me show you a clip that I think is got one little subplot in support of the American dream. And I would call this part of there are different components to the American dream, but let me just highlight that one of the biggest components is what I would call the material ideal, the ideal that you work hard and you can have the nice big house, you know, and the economic prosperity. Okay. But what does that mean? Okay, so here's a clip.
Billy, you rented a new house? Rent? You hear what he said, Mr. Bailey? What's that? I own the house. Me, Giuseppe Martini, I own my own house. No more we live like a pigs in this Paris field. Hurry, come on, bring the baby. I'll take the kids in the car. Oh, thank you, Mr. Bailey. All right, kids, here. Get in here. Get right up in the seat there. Get the dog.
Mr. and Mrs. Martini, welcome home.
Hello, George. He's always making a speech.
Hee-haw! Sam Wayman.
Oh, who cares? Bread, that this house may never know hunger. Salt, that life may always have flavor.
And wine, that joy and prosperity may reign forever. Enter the Martini Castle.
Look, Mr. Potter, it's no skin off my nose. I'm just your little rent collector. But you can't laugh off this Bailey Park anymore. Look at it.
Congressman Black is here to see you, sir.
I'll tell the congressman to wait. Go on.
15 years ago, a half a dozen houses stuck here and there. There's the old cemetery, squirrels, buttercups, daisies. I used to hunt rabbits there myself. Look at it today. Dozens of the prettiest little homes you ever saw. 90% owned by suckers who used to pay rent to you. Your Potter's Field, my dear Mr. Employer, is becoming just that. And are the local yokels making with those David and Goliath wisecracks?
Oh, they are they? Even though they know the Baileys never made a dime out of it.
You know very well why. The Baileys were all chumps. Every one of these homes is worth twice what it cost a building and loan to build. If I were you, Mr. Potter...
You are not me.
As I say, it's no skin off my nose. But one of these days, this bright young man's going to be asking George Bailey for a job.
Bailey family's been a boil on my neck long enough.
And don't worry about that particular caption. We're going to hit that next week. But just, you know, a few observations. Right, what we have here is, you know, a low-income Italian family. By the way, I love the goats. And I'll throw the goat and go, meh. Yeah, great part of that scene. I'm just, yeah, we don't throw goats into Model Ts often enough. Anyway, a low-income, you know, Italian-American family, which at that time in the 1930s were a lot low income, have a chance at decent housing instead of paying rent to Potter. And, you know, sometimes people who pay rent are in, there are some people in very difficult housing situations because of that. But having that opportunity. And then the other part I love about this scene is the blessing that they give. What a great, you know, and this is a Catholic tradition. And I'm thinking, you know, Protestants, maybe there's some things we can borrow from Catholics. Like having, and you get a new house, why not bless it? Bread, you know, so that you will never know hunger. You know, and salt so that life will be full of flavor, and wine so you live in. But it's also about joy and family and that sort of thing, and community. And you know, when God says be fruitful, I mean, I think that's part. The other thing is this then. For those of us that have good houses and are in very comfortable situations, it is maybe easier to critique the American dream, and necessarily so, to say if that becomes your highest goal in life, is making a bunch of money, that is a problem. We can see that. But this points our attention to people who are low-income people, who sometimes don't have that opportunity. And so to have the opportunity for good housing, I think there's something about the American dream that is good in that way. Or you want to take it even one step further, people I know in Kenya who are desperately, desperately poor, who don't have running water, who don't have electricity, who don't have, they don't even have enough, they're going hungry many days of the week. You know, at some level, that is a problem, and prosperity is something that would be very, very good for them. And George, of course, is working, you know, for those people, for the poor people who don't have a voice for themselves. And also, by the way, just to take it one level further, this is a time in the 1930s when the U.S. government established policies to get low-income loans to people through the FHA. But the way they did it was they categorized neighborhoods A, B, C, and D, from the wealthiest to the poorest. And they said, you know, basically, and banks took these maps and says, we're not going to give loans to people in D because they're too much of a risk. Like they're too poor. These are less desirable neighborhoods. And one of the ways they determined they were less desirable is, well, look who's there. It's blacks and Italian immigrants and Jewish immigrants. And those people cannot get the low income. It's called redlining. And that had implications for decades, especially for blacks. Later on, it was easier for Italian and Jewish people to get loans. But then you also have like national neighborhood covenants so along where it was like, so you can't sell your home to a black. That happened here in Canton, Ridgewood neighborhood. They had covenants saying when you bought a home, you could not sell to blacks. So there were policies that kept out, right, certain kinds of low-income people from moving up. And that's part of the story here, which is basically what Potter is doing. So here's a side of the American dream that I think points to issues of justice. So part of the answer may be, well, it depends on what aspect of it or how you interpret it or what the situation is, because there are a lot of stories out there. And so watching those stories and thinking about other people in their situation is a good Christian practice, I think. 2 weeks from now, not next week we are going to still talk about It's a Wonderful Life, but instead of story and plot, we're actually going to talk about visual aspects of what cinema and movies do, and we're going to use It's a Wonderful Life because a lot of times we don't notice what actually is going on visually that help make movies and stories very, very powerful. But 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be talking about a different movie that's set in the 1950s. It's called not It's a Wonderful Life. We've done that, haven't we? The prize winner of Defiance, Ohio. Not a big blockbuster movie. But it's an interesting movie in certain ways. This is harder to find, and you may not be able to find it. You can get it by DVD or on Hoopla through the North Canton Library. Unfortunately, Stark County doesn't have it. None of the streaming services have it as part of their package right now. You can rent it from Prime for whatever, $4 or $5. I'm saying if you don't see it, that's okay. If you do see it, it can be helpful for discussion. I'm giving you 2 weeks for those of you that might check out the DVD and then return it to somebody else that might want it if you go that route in North Canton. But let me close with another story. That's 2 weeks from now. But let me close with another story. Matthew 16, what we call a true story, like this is what we believe really happened. Jesus is talking to the disciples shortly before he goes to the cross. In fact, he's told them, I'm going to be killed and suffer and die. I'm going to die. And then Peter objected, and Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." No, this is where I'm going. And then he tells the disciples, this is for you too. Then Jesus told his disciples, if any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world, but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? We've heard it before, but it's a story that's good to hear again and again and again in different times and different places. So, all right, thank you very much. I have to run off to choir, but if you have things you want to say, catch me after church. That's my thought. All right. Thank you. Good night. Good night. Good evening. Good morning.